It is official, everybody. Strickland is next up for the middleweight title picture after Dricus du Plessis and Israel Adesanya wraps up this weekend. And I'm going to be honest with you. I already made a video, I think like 2 days ago, talking about how I thought the middleweight title picture was going to go, talking about Dricus du Plessis and Israel Adesanya. How do those title runs go from thus forward? And that video aged very poorly, and a lot of you guys came to remind me yesterday. The problem is yesterday's like my one vacation day a year where I go to northern Michigan where Wi-Fi is not a right, it is a privilege. So I came back to a whole different landscape of middleweight. A landscape that, I'll be real with you, I am a huge fan of. Now, I don't want to waste a ton of your guys' time. We're going to hear Dana White say it because this surprised me. This comes from the press conference that they did before UFC 305, and they asked Dana White, where does Strickland fit in all of this?
Dana, you told Jim Rome that Sean Strickland's getting the next crack at the title. So where does that leave Robert Whittaker versus Khamzat Chimaev?
Well, what I was saying is he's ranked number one in the world. He deserves the fight if that happens. But, you know, you never know what can happen, how these fights could play out. But what I did say on Jim Rome is we got a lot of fun things happening in the middleweight division coming into 25.
So it's basically just timing, who looks the best, stuff like that.
Yeah, Strickland deserves it.
Thank you. All the people who said I was a tier 1 Strickland glazer. Dana White said it himself. Now, I understand Dana White also says that John Jones is the current pound-for-pound number 1 fighter, but you know what? We can agree to disagree on some things. Thank you, Dana White, for backing me up on this one. He is. Like, I don't need to be, like, Sean Strickland is the number 1 guy in the middleweight division isn't something that, like, only Strickland fans are saying. No. That is the literal ranking of the middleweight division. Listen. I know rankings barely matter, because the fact that Khamzat Chimaev, the number 11 guy, gets the chance to fight Robert Whittaker, the number 3 guy, after his last fight in the middleweight division was against Kamaru Usman. Yeah. And the fact that they tried to say that Kamaru Usman versus Khamzat was a number 1 contenders match. Yeah, no. Don't get me wrong. I like that Dana White came out and said it. I do think it's funny that he was like, well, Strickland's the number 1 contender. He deserves it. Wasn't Bilal Muhammad not the super clear number 1 guy? But you let Colby Covington fight Leon Edwards regardless. Like, I get it. I'm not going to bite the hand that feeds me. But I'm just trying to articulate to Luke how surprising this was as an MMA fan. I feel like we have to fight to prove the most basic of things, that being that Sean Strickland has a 1 next to his name, and that 1 means number 1 contender. Israel Adesanya is fighting Dricus du Plessis. Okay, like, the world doesn't make sense like you think it is. I'm just amazed that middleweight is working the way that it is. Now, why do I think this is, okay? Because I think there's an underlying, not motive, but an underlying reasoning for this being the case. And that is that there is a crucial shift in how the UFC views Khamzat Chimaev. Let me just tell you this right now. I believe the UFC looks at Khamzat Chimaev over here, Mr. 13-0. That's pulled out of, I think, 5 fights at this time. I think it is 5 fights he's pulled out of. They view Mr. Khamzat Chimaev, okay, as more of a risk than an investment. I want you to think about this. Even if you are a Khamzat Chimaev super glazer, triple champion in the making, super fan, you cannot deny that Khamzat Chimaev is one of the most volatile people to ever matchmake, okay? Like, I talked about this. Chimaev making his way into the public zeitgeist was pretty much because he had a 10-day turnaround. 10-day turnaround between these 2 fights. Second round finish, first round finish. He beat Gerald Meerschaert by KO. Li Jingliang, that was a great fight. Like, look at this. Dude, 2020, July, done. In the same month of July, done. September of the same year. These are 3 fights, dude. 3 fights, 1 year. Okay? Khamzat Chimaev, win, win, win. All finishes, by the way. Li Jingliang, 1 year later, finish. First round finish. Oh, okay, this is where we start messing up here, okay? Because we went from October to April. Still, that would be considered a very active fighter. That would be considered an average active fighter. From Li Jingliang to Gilbert Burns. This fight was a big deal because this was Khamzat Chimaev jumping from Li Jingliang all the way to, at this point, a Gilbert Burns who just freshly lost a title shot against Kamaru Usman. That is how this was viewed. I want you to think about this. Gilbert Burns versus Khamzat Chimaev in 2022 was the same thing as Robert Whittaker versus current Khamzat Chimaev in 2024. When we talk about the privilege of Khamzat Chimaev, and we're like, oh, well, you let Umar fight Corey. First off, that is privilege right there. No. It's the fact that we did this 2 times for Khamzat Chimaev. There's another time that we did it, but we're going to cover that. So the Gilbert Burns fight. At this point, Khamzat Chimaev could have waited for a title shot. But no, they decided to try to make Chimaev versus Diaz. Okay? At this point, the UFC was sick and tired of Nate Diaz because he wanted to leave the UFC on free agency and fight Jake Paul. That is why the UFC was mad at him. So, they booked Chimaev versus Diaz. Chimaev missed weight by 7.5 pounds. Do you know how insane Chimaev fans are? They see this situation and they're like, oh, the medical team told him that he had to do... It doesn't change the fact that you fucked up a whole card, bro. You destroyed a card. It was so bad that there was a whole conspiracy that they planned it from the get-go. And the fact that nobody got mad at Khamzat Chimaev, even though we threatened to kick Paulo Costa out of the middleweight division for missing weight. We did that with Paulo Costa. We didn't do it with Khamzat. That's all I'm saying. And then... The bombs are dropping. Dana White's coming to get me, bro. He launched the F-15 fighter jet. Pfft, done. I'm talking too much game over here. Anyways, Khamzat Chimaev, Kevin Holland gets made. First round finish, okay? And then we take more than a full year off to fight Paulo Costa. Paulo Costa couldn't make it. I'm not giving... the only thing I'm giving Chimaev shit for this fight is the fact that we took a year and some chains off of MMA fighting after you finished Kevin Holland in round 1. Okay? It doesn't matter the reason. The fact is Chimaev is not an active fighter anymore. Chimaev built a reputation off fighting everybody, I kill everybody. No. You take a year off in between first round finishes. At least that was until you fought Usman on 10 days notice in 3 rounds where it favored you, and Kamaru Usman won the 3rd round. The point I'm trying to make here is Khamzat Chimaev is one of the most volatile fighters in the UFC because they book him against Robert Whittaker, okay? A main event in UFC Saudi Arabia. They offer... Okay, no. Whoa, let me actually go back for a second because not a lot of people know this. When Paulo Costa couldn't make it against Kamaru Usman, they offered him Sean Strickland at this time. Keep in mind, at this time, Strickland was the current middleweight champion of the world a month and a half after beating Israel Adesanya. When Paulo Costa couldn't make it, they called up the current champion Strickland to fight Khamzat. That is the fact that you even attempted that. Don't pretend like there isn't favoritism in this division. When we offered a guy making his middleweight ranked debut, okay? And we offered him the champion. Don't ever act like there isn't privilege going on there. So then they do what Robert Whittaker. They offered Strickland the fight, but then they said no because they were worried that Strickland was going to talk too much shit for the Saudi Arabian government. I'm not even kidding you. That was part of the reason. They told Tim Welch this. So they decided to do Robert Whittaker Chimaev. That's a dangerous fight. Respect to both fighters. And then Khamzat Chimaev gets a case of the fucking sniffles and can't make it against Robert Whittaker. Boom! That fight falls through. And then they rebook it after Robert Whittaker destroys Ikram Aliskerov in the first round. Villain Whittaker is a different breed. And then Khamzat Chimaev gets the Robert Whittaker fight. Now, I don't give the UFC shit for that because it was Robert Whittaker who called for the fight. I'm fair. The UFC was not going to rebook Chimaev versus Whittaker until Whittaker said something. That Robert Whittaker is the only guy that I would understand making this. Okay? And then we got Strickland. Strickland over here, whether you want to admit it or not, might be the most consistent MMA fighter in the history of the sport. What I mean by consistent is this man fights the exact same in every single fight that he's ever been in. This man could have beaten Alex Pereira if he just decided that wrestling was a part of the sport of MMA. No. Instead, he went up there like iCarly and got sent into the saddle realm by Poetan. Okay? Let's do fight history. First off, okay? Actually, I'm going to go back a little bit further, just so you can understand how consistent this man is, because a lot of people don't give him this credit, okay? Just the difference in Dana White privilege to they were trying to get rid of this man. Cannonier versus Strickland, December, done. Loses the fight. It was a split decision. I'm actually not that mad at this decision. I understand why Cannonier was ruled the winner, but I can understand how Strickland, like, this was a quintessential split decision. I'm not that mad about it. 1 month later, they asked him to save the first fight card of 2020. Wait, what year was it? 2023. Keep in mind, this is the first time that any UFC fighter ever was the last fight of a year and then was the first fighter of the year. So Strickland fights Imavov, beats Imavov in a unanimous decision, and I think that comes into play later. And then, for whatever reason, they book Strickland versus Magomedov. This isn't like a good Magomedov. No. This is a guy who is managed by Ali Abdelaziz. He got a good deal, and they thought Magomedov was going to beat Strickland. That's just how it works, dude. They thought Magomedov was going to beat Strickland, but no, Strickland proved that Dagestani privilege doesn't work in the middleweight division, and humbles Magomedov. And then, on short notice, again, they offer him Israel Adesanya because it was going to be Jared Cannonier versus Adesanya 2, and the pay-per-views were looking so bad on that card. And I actually implore you to look at the Adesanya versus Strickland card. This video is already going to be too long as it is, just so you can understand how angry the UFC was. They offered Strickland the Adesanya fight. They lowballed him an offer. Strickland said no. And then they were looking to book Adesanya versus, I don't know who they're going to book him up against. I don't think they had anybody else. So they decided, wait a minute. Oh, no. This actually comes into the Dricus stuff. So Dricus fought Robert Whittaker. They thought they were going to do Robert Whittaker. Robert Whittaker versus Israel Adesanya in Perth. That turned out to fall through completely because Dricus won. Dricus broke his hand and couldn't make it. So they asked Jared Cannonier to do it. The pay-per-views were looking so bad that they asked Strickland. Strickland said no at first, and then Israel Adesanya paid out the other half of his contract so Strickland could fight. That is the backstory on this fight. Strickland was never meant to be on this card. Israel Adesanya lobbied for him to be on this card. Thank you, but you suck. You lost. And then the title run begins and ends so quickly that I swear if you blinked you would have missed it. Strickland goes to Canada in one of the worst cards I've ever seen outside of the main event. Strickland versus Dricus du Plessis. Loses. Split decision. I understand it. I'm not that biased. I get it. Strickland, Dricus could have gone either way. Dricus wins the title. Then, on June 1st, keep in mind, and near the tail end of June, Khamzat Chimaev was going to fight Robert Whittaker. They booked Strickland to fight Paulo Costa. Strickland steps up, beats Paulo Costa. The fact that this was a split decision proves that there is rigging going on in the UFC. This is all jokes. Do not send a cease and desist. I'm joking here. Obviously, every single judge in the entirety of MMA have never once made a bad call, and they definitely believe in the UFC fighters incompletely, and there 100% has never been a case of a potential rigged scorecard. I think I covered my ass on that. Okay, Strickland beats Paulo Costa. And now we're here. Keep in mind, the only other dude that you could argue would be Robert Whittaker, who is a loss to Dricus du Plessis via finish, and the UFC doesn't really acknowledge him as a number one contender because he lost to Israel Adesanya all those times. Strickland beat Adesanya, almost beat Dricus, and beat Paulo Costa, who was somebody that was ranked high enough in the division that you could argue was a number one contenders match. We had to wait for Khamzat to fight Robert Whittaker in order to maybe put him above him, the 11 guy above the number one guy. So yes, I am glad that Dana White saw reason here. Now, I'm going to wrap it all the way around, okay? All the way to the current event that is going on, Du Plessis versus Adesanya. What does this do to this fight? It makes it infinitely more entertaining. The thought that whoever wins this is going to have to run it back with Strickland, which, if we have an Israel Adesanya versus Strickland rematch if Adesanya wins, brother, that's automatically going to sell well. You could put that anywhere, okay? Maybe even a UFC 307, make them fight at elevation. Maybe that'll make them fight a little bit different, but hey, who knows? I feel like the UFC likes using Strickland to fix really bad cards, so maybe they'll do Du Plessis versus Strickland for UFC 307. You never know, probably not, but it's possible. So Du Plessis could also fight Strickland. That's a fun fight. Du Plessis is a dog with somebody with a style like Strickland. UFC 305 just became more interesting purely because Dana White acknowledged that Strickland was the number one contender. And the reason that he did this wasn't because of the love for Strickland. No. It's because Khamzat Chimaev is such a risky investment in MMA right now that the fact is that they are just not going to give him these opportunities until he can prove that he can actually make it. And the reason that I believe that is because if we go to events, okay, and we go to UFC 308, which is the card October 28th. This will be a full year since the last time Khamzat Chimaev fought. He is not the co-main event. It is Cyril Gane versus Volkov. He is not the co-main event. The only fight that he's above is Magomed and Rakibs. And the reason I believe this is, I said before, it's because they didn't want to make it a 5-round fight because they know that favors Robert Whittaker. I think that's part of it. But I think the real reason is because they don't want to waste time marketing Khamzat Chimaev as the co-main event. And they want to set people's expectations with Cyril Gane and Volkov, who are consistent fighters in making dates, that they aren't even going to market him as a co-main event until they prove he can make it. Let me tell you this right now. Nasruddin Imavov needs to get into the running of being the backup fighter for Khamzat Chimaev, because this could be such a big step up in the rankings in terms of name value if he's able to make this fight. And stylistically, he's very different from Khamzat Chimaev to Robert Whittaker. One of the reasons that I think Robert Whittaker did well against Ikram is because Ikram and Khamzat are very similar. If Nasruddin steps up here, that's a different stylistic matchup. I believe Nasruddin needs to step up to be the backup fighter for Khamzat Chimaev, and the UFC knows this because Khamzat Chimaev is just super inconsistent. But there you go. That's my thoughts on this whole Strickland is going to be next up to fight, which is amazing news, by the way. I am not happy that he did this yesterday when I wasn't here, but you know what? You guys get content today. Thank you, everybody who continues to like, comment, and subscribe. It means the most to me. And I will see you all next time. Adios.